They walked into the bar like anyone else, two brothers laughing, carrying the bond of family. But the moment their skin color was noticed, everything shifted. Eyes turned cold, whispers grew sharper, and suddenly they weren't just customers, they were targets. What happened next wasn't about drinks or small talk. It was about power, prejudice, and a cruel game that too many know far too well. But these weren't ordinary young men, and the truth about who they really were would shake everyone to the core. So, the question is, what happens when those judged become the ones holding all the power? It was supposed to be a night like any other. Two brothers, twins with an unbreakable bond, decided to grab a late meal after a long week. They weren't looking for trouble, just a quiet corner in a local bar where laughter could drown out the weight of the world. On the surface, their lives looked ordinary, family men, disciplined, carrying themselves with calm confidence. But beneath that ease was something most people around them could never imagine: years of training, sacrifice, and silent service to their country. To the strangers watching them that night, though, none of that mattered. All they saw was the color of their skin, and that was enough to turn a peaceful evening into something far more dangerous. The laughter between the brothers didn't last long. From the moment they stepped into the bar, the air shifted. A few heads turned. Conversations dipped into silence before picking up again, just a little louder, a little sharper. The kind of atmosphere that made you feel unwelcome without a word being spoken. They'd both felt it before, the quiet hostility that seeps into your skin, but tonight it grew heavier with every passing second. At first, it was the stares. Long, unbroken glares that followed them to their table, as if their very presence demanded explanation. Then came the whispers, barely audible but dripping with contempt. It wasn't about what they wore, how they spoke, or where they sat. It was about one thing only, and everyone in the room knew it. The tension snapped when a group of off-duty cops at the counter began to laugh. Not the kind of laugh you ignore, but the kind designed to cut deep. Mocking, cruel. One officer tilted his head toward them, muttering something that made the others chuckle louder. The brothers caught fragments. "Don't belong! Watch yourselves!" Words wrapped in venom. The twins sat a little straighter, exchanging a glance that spoke louder than anything. They knew this wasn't going to stop here. Then, it escalated. Heavy boots scraped across the floor as two of the officers stood and made their way over. They leaned on the table, invading space that wasn't theirs to claim. Questions flew: where they were from, what they were doing here if they thought this was their kind of place. None of it was asked with curiosity. Every word was coated with accusation, as if existing in that room was already a crime. The bar grew quieter, all eyes fixed on the standoff. The twins' calm silence only fueled the officer's aggression. One cop smirked, knocking over a drink with deliberate carelessness, waiting for a reaction. Another tapped the badge on his chest, a silent warning that he believed gave him full control of the situation. The power dynamic was clear, at least on the surface, but under the surface a storm brewed. The brothers didn't raise their voices, didn't lash out. They'd been trained to control fear, to channel anger into focus, yet the injustice burned hot. They weren't just fighting stares or insults anymore. They were staring down a system that had too often turned simple nights into life-or-death moments. And then came the final spark. One officer leaned in close, lowering his voice but making sure the entire bar heard, "People like you should remember their place." The words hung heavy, poisonous, impossible to ignore. The bar held its breath, waiting. The brothers locked eyes once more. They could play small, let it pass, and walk away, or they could let the truth of who they were change the night forever. Because what the officers didn't know, what nobody in that bar yet realized, was that these weren't just ordinary men sitting quietly under the weight of prejudice. These were men whose lives had been built on discipline, resilience, and commanding respect in places far more dangerous than a bar on a Friday night. And the moment that truth came out, everything would change. The officer's laughter turned into a shove. One of the brothers' chairs scraped across the floor, the sound echoing through the bar like a warning shot. The crowd stiffened, but no one moved to intervene. That silence, the silence of witnesses choosing comfort over courage, was almost louder than the harassment itself. Another officer stepped closer, chest puffed, daring them to react. His hand hovered near his holster, a gesture so familiar in stories that too often end in tragedy. The room seemed to shrink, the weight of every injustice pressing down in that single moment. The twins could feel it. The thin line between restraint and chaos, dignity and danger, every muscle in their bodies tensed, but they didn't flinch. They had seen worse. They had survived worse. And now, as the mocking words grew sharper, a different kind of silence took over inside them. A silence born of discipline, of training, of knowing exactly who they were. Then came the breaking point. One officer leaned so close his badge nearly touched the table and sneered, loud enough for all to hear, "Men like you don't last long." Remember that. That was it. The moment the bar would never forget. The brothers rose, steady, deliberate, their presence commanding without a word spoken. And for the first time that night, it wasn't the officers who held the power, it was the men they had underestimated, because now the truth stood ready to shatter every assumption in that room. These weren't just two black men targeted in a bar. They were leaders, warriors, men who carried the rank of captain and commander in the Navy SEALs. And the officers who mocked them were about to learn exactly who they had been messing with. The bar froze. In an instant, the mocking grins on the officers' faces collapsed into shock. The truth had landed like a thunderclap. These weren't just men to be ridiculed. They were decorated leaders, brothers who had commanded respect in battlefields across the world. Suddenly, the balance of power flipped. The officers who once sneered now shifted uneasily, their arrogance stripped bare under the weight of their ignorance. But for the twins, this wasn't a moment of triumph. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was a bitter reminder that no matter the medals they carried, no matter the sacrifices they had made for their country, they could still walk into a bar and be reduced to the color of their skin. That sting cut deeper than any insult. They left that night without raising a fist, without shouting a word. Their silence was louder than any confrontation. Yet the memory lingered, not just for them, but for everyone who witnessed it. It forced an uncomfortable truth into the open. Respect shouldn't have to be earned through rank, titles, or uniforms. It should be given because dignity is a right, not a privilege. And so the question remains, how many more lives must prove their worth before respect is automatic? How many more stories must echo before change takes root? This isn't just their story. It's the story of countless others whose humanity is challenged before it's acknowledged. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we stopped asking who someone is before deciding how they deserve to be treated. Because at the end of the day, isn't being human enough?